Well, hello, everybody. I'm really excited to be here for, I think, my 8th ng-conf. I was doing this math over and over, and I kept coming up with different numbers, so we're just going to go with 8. Is everybody okay with that? Yeah. All right. So I'm here today talking about cleaning up your old Angular apps. And so I want to start off by understanding how old are our Angular apps. So I'm going to do an Angular-style countdown, and raise your hand if you have an app of this version. So 16, 15, 14, 13, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 2. That's it. All right. So I know from experience that a lot of you have not just one main app, but you have secret other little apps that you don't really touch anymore. And there is this quote, most of the code in the world is dead. And this is really like a sad and scary quote to me, to think as an engineer, most of the code I've written in my life is not in production anymore, it's not in use, it's not helping anyone, it's not being maintained, no one looks at it anymore. And this is sad because maybe we could do better. Maybe if we think back and we focus on upgradability, we focus on going back and revitalizing our code, we can have more of our code be alive for a long time. And I also think this is a very important quote because anyone know who this is from? This is from me. My name is Fluin. I work at a company called Axelar in the blockchain space. So if you have any interest in crypto, blockchain, there are real developers there. There are building real software. I would love if you want to come up, say hi later, talk to me about that. I've got lots to say. I give lots of presentations on that side of the universe as well now. I am currently an Angular GDE, and I'm a former Angular team member. One of my claims to fame, and why I think I maybe deserve to be up here, is that I was actually, I created the Angular update guide. Has anyone used update.angular.io? Okay, so I've got such headlining commits as fix page title. So really, really good code in the beginning there. But as a developer, being out of date really, really sucks. If you are out of date, like I didn't actually see that many hands on 16, none of you are able to take advantage of all these cool developer previews. And that sucks. The standards of an ecosystem, not just a platform like Angular, but a whole ecosystem evolve over time. And when you are out of date, you are unable to take advantage of those, and you're missing out on best practices. And we also look at tools like NPM, where it's immutable, right? It's going to be around forever. But it's not exactly that easy and that simple. If you look at going back to older Angular versions, I actually tried this. You have to switch to older versions of Node, but then you end up running into problems where it's like, hey, I have dependencies that need to be compiled for my system, and they don't support Apple Silicon. So now I can't actually go back. And so we have this hard world where living out of sync with the rest of the ecosystem is really challenging, and it fundamentally sucks. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through this today in 3 parts. First, I want to go through the breakingest changes that Angular has made through its history, so we'll do a little whirlwind tour. Then I want to give you what I believe is the best method for cleaning up your apps, getting up to date. And last, I want to give you a few tips on how to get unstuck when you inevitably get stuck. So let's start off by going through the breakingest changes. So I want you to think back to around 2016. This was Angular 2.0.0 RC period. I was a noogler. I had just joined. I was 2.5 out of 3 years into wearing Google Glass. I had my little propeller hat. And I was sitting in the team. I didn't actually know Angular 2 that well. I knew AngularJS really, really well. And I was getting to know it, I was getting to know the team, and then Michiko came by and he said, everything's broken, we need to fix it. We need modules. There's this design doc, you can actually go and find it, and it lists all the reasons why you cannot have components running the show. You need modules to solve all these developer experience problems, you need modules to solve all these other dependency problems. There's even something in this doc called component kidnapping. So if you want a real history lesson, go find the Understanding NG module doc. But this was my first introduction to breaking changes in Angular, where all of the seeds I'd been using, all of the code I'd written, I had to go fix it. So things have gotten better, and I think you're going to see throughout this whirlwind tour that things have gotten better and better and better, but there have been really critical moments along the way that we've had to overcome. And a lot of us have overcome it. We see that there's a lot of people on 14, 15, but every day I run into applications that are on really, really old versions. And so I thought it'd be useful just for us to kind of acknowledge some of the breaking changes we've moved past. So I'm going to call these the early days, the primitive Angular, where you had no CLI. So 2.x had no CLI in the beginning. You were cloning a seed project, hoping it works, figuring out your barrels, figuring out your system.js. We had no migrations. The Angular team hadn't taken on all those challenges. And we also had misaligned versions. So when you were using Angular Material, it had a different version number than the Angular you were using. And that was true with the CLI as well when that was introduced. And so that was some of the impetus for us creating update.angular.io, is to really list out all the things that have changed so that you could actually understand and update your project. And hopefully we don't need it as much anymore, but it still is a critical part of the ecosystem. This is a command that I typed over and over and over and over. This will live with me in my fingertips forever. This was the update command when you were going from any version to another version back in the 2.x, 4.x period. So you npm install Angular, and then you use bash expansion to give all the packages of Angular that you needed to update. And then you also had to make sure you had a corresponding TypeScript version and a corresponding RxJS version. Anyone happy that we don't have to do this anymore? Okay, good. Also, the starter project looked like this back then. I think we have a much nicer starter project now. And actually, this is an app that I'll refer to a couple times. So what I did, I've done this many times, but I went back and I instantiated the first version you could create with the CLI, and then I updated it, 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 all the way to the latest version. And so as I went through version 6 and 7, we noticed that, hey, we've got unified versioning. The CLI, Material, Angular, they all sync up now. So when you're using version 7, you're using version 7 of everything. We had CLI. And for the first time, we had schematics and an ng update that was trying to take ownership of some of these updates for us. Does anyone remember the RxJS 5 to 6 migration? If Ben Lesh is still in the audience, we had to ship RxJS compat. We were getting away from side effect imports. But for a lot of developers, it's just like, oh, I have to go redo all my RxJS, kind of. Sorry. At the time, we also had a new HTTP client, which was better, smaller, faster, better in every way, but a completely different API. So go update all of your HTTP code to the new way of doing it. And then at the same time, Angular Fire was moving away from being an Angular Fire package into being an @Angular/Fire package. So this was kind of the world that we lived in 2018. Then Angular 8x came out. We added differential loading. So now your package structure, so all your DevOps needs to update, because now you need to worry about, okay, we're shipping both ES5 and ES 2015, which gives you all these benefits. But you also have to switch over all your Angular Material imports. So instead of importing all of your buttons and components from Angular Material, you're going to import from the deep import within the npm package. This was also the moment that you had to go and update to Node 10. One of the things that I ran into while building that V6 project and updating it over and over and over was this really fun error. Package Codalyzer has an incompatible peer dependency, which, as we all know, peer dependencies are just the best, especially when you didn't add any of those dependencies. Fortunately, you could just ignore this one. And this is going to be a recurring theme in updating Angular and getting rid of all your cruft, is some of these things you just ignore them and they go away. This error did go away, not in 8, but I think in 10 it went away. All right, so then we move on to Angular 9. This was the Ivy timeframe. This was really exciting time to be part of the Angular community, but at the same time, Angular, if you had a large project that depended on any of the implementation details of Angular, your project was going to break. Right? New compiler, new runtime environment, your project was breaking. But this was at the same time a really good lesson to all of us, which is that don't depend on implementation details. Don't depend on unspecified ordering of when change detection happens, right? I saw a Reddit thread just this week before the blackout where a developer was asking, like, hey, I want to do a bind to inner HTML, but I don't want to use the sanitizer because I want to let some things through. So I'm going to use a custom sanitizer and then wrap it. Don't do that. Don't do that. If you are trying to overwrite and do things in a way that Angular doesn't really want you to do, you are going to have a bad time on every update because the team can't worry about your situation. They can only have time to worry about the things that are using Angular in the way that it is intended. Also in the 9.x update, it says you need to update to Node version 14, which was really great because once I'd finished the update, it said it was only compatible with Node 16. So at that point, I got to Node 16, which introduced a bunch of problems that I'll talk about a little bit later in the talk. And then we get to this kind of pre-golden era of version 10 to version 15, and then on to 16, where lots of stuff changed, but apps just kept working. I feel like over the last 3 years, the Angular team has done such a fantastic job of applying these migrations. So every time you run ng update, it's going to say, we checked this thing, nothing happened. We checked this thing, 6 changes were made. You checked this thing, 5 changes were made. So let's just do one more round of applause for the Angular team for ng update. So we heard about differential loading and how exciting an addition to the package format that was. They dropped that back in 2022. And we also lost view engine compatibility. So we used to have ng-cc, the compatibility compiler, which took all of the old view engine libraries and made them work in Ivy projects. I love that. I was using a couple dependencies that were from version 6 in my version 9 and 10 app. And like the fact that that worked made me really happy because I didn't have to do any work. At the same time, in the last couple of years, they've switched from tslint to eslint. They've gotten rid of protractor or deprecated it, and then no more -- prod. And each of these things seems like a little work, right? And each of these is a very small project. But what we see as developers over and over is it's death by 1,000 paper cuts. I can get past any issue as an engineer, but it's really hard to get past lots and lots of issues. All right. So one other change that I've noticed, and this isn't official, and I talked to the team about this, but you really shouldn't be using ng-new. And the reason is because if you have the wrong global version of the Angular CLI installed, it's going to create a new project in an older version. And so like the canonical best practice way that I recommend, which is nowhere near as sexy, nowhere near as beautiful, is npx Angular CLI at latest new, which it doesn't have the same buzz to ng-new. I apologize. All right, so that is our whirlwind tour. We've seen all the breaking changes. We've been punched in the face a couple times, but we're still breathing. Let's talk about if you are on one of those older versions, what do you actually do to get updated? So I have a simple process. It's only got about 32 steps. No, not quite that many. So first thing, it's pretty straightforward, but make sure your app actually works. I've seen a lot of people who they run into a bug or they make a mistake and they're like, oh, I'm going to just try and update and force and see if that fixes it. No, a new version of Angular is not going to fix a bug that you already have in your code. I'm sorry. So make sure your app is up to date. Make sure it's clean. Make sure that it works. Have a clean commit. Don't have any pending stage changes in the index or anything like that. And then this is an optional thing, but I really, really recommend it. Run a production build and save it somewhere. I find it really informative to be able to compare bundle sizes, file layouts before and after. And it helps inform a lot of my DevOps infrastructure as I go forward. And it really informs some of the performance methodology that I do. All right, then we get into the fun of the ng update. Start with Angular CLI and core, then go into all the other Angular packages you rely on, Material, CDK, Angular Fire, all those sorts of things, and then everything else. And then the next step is fix it. If you have a large application, something is going to break and you're inevitably going to have to go fix it. And I'll give you some of the best practices and some of the tips for overcoming these things, but the variety of bugs and issues that I've seen is overwhelming, and it's very, very shallow. A lot of people are going to have a very few specific bugs in your code. And then test and validate. So actually go make sure that not just the page builds and loads, but go log in. I've had a bunch of cases where I've built an app, I've updated, it worked great, and then I got into my admin portal, which is pulling in new modules, and everything falls apart. So really go deep. And then if you're coming from a version like 6, 7, 8, anything, you're going to have to go back and start, because you're updating one version at a time. And the reason this is to really make it a much more manageable process. So this is the command that I use all the time. So npx Angular CLI at the version I want to go to. So if I'm starting on version 6, like I did with that example application, I do this with version 7. I do this with version 8, 9, 10, one by one, all the way up. And you don't need to specify like 12.0.0, just 12. This works really well. Each version is going to make Angular more and more helpful. I kind of love watching the outputs of the build process change between versions because it gets more beautiful, it gets more helpful, like bundle size reporting, it's in that nice little table now. All of these things are really, really nice as you go. And there's one more best practice tool that I am going to run that's going to be a standard part of your process, which is -- force. I know this seems a little scary, but whether you are updating before your dependencies have updated their peer deps, whether you are updating applications in kind of any way, I always end up finding myself using -- force for some of my packages. So if you have a clean Git commit history, you're going to be fine. You can always revert back. Don't worry about it. -- force is not as scary as it seems. And so dash dash force, we know about that. One thing I get a few questions on is what about minors? What about like 16.0.1 or patches and minors? Don't worry about them. I have never actually seen an issue that wasn't just solved by going to the latest version. And when you follow that command that I had, the ng-update command that takes you to version 6, then 7, then 8, it always takes you to the latest patch of the latest minor of that major. And you're actually going to have the best experience because that's when the migration scripts are most evolved. They're the best migration scripts, all of those sorts of things. Yeah, so actually, Angular follows fantastic semantic versioning, and so you can rely on it. Dash dash allow dirty is another one. So sometimes your update doesn't go as planned, and you need to play around. You need to make some tweaks before you run the update command. Dash dash allow dirty will basically allow you to have a dirty commit history, and then move forward and actually do ng updates. So I have seen one case where applying 2 updates actually fixed the issue. So that occasionally does come up where maybe you've got a peer dependency where something is just mismatched and a couple updates actually fix it. So I know that sounds weird, but not with your code. It's got to be problems with Angular and its dependencies. And then again, Angular C-align core together, and then material, Angular Fire, and then everything else. When you're doing your dependencies, make sure you're updating them one at a time. Really, really limit this, and then commit regularly. Anytime you have working code that does anything successfully, commit, right? This is the wonder of source control. Be willing to just revert, reset. I know that Git commands are scary a little bit sometimes, but they're really, really good. So I keep mentioning this project that I started on version 6 and I brought it all the way to 16. On the left side, you're going to see what that original project looked like, and on the right side, you see what a brand new project looks like in version 16. And they're different. If you started with the legacy, those migrations are not going to give you the same result of a brand new Angular project. And so what I recommend you do is actually go and create a brand new application and compare. You'll see the end-to-end folder is different. The where we put the tsconfigs is different. The structure and layout of your angular.json packages or configuration file is going to be different. And so it's really informative to clean up your project by just creating a new project and going kind of folder by folder and saying, do I like the new standard, or is there a reason for me to keep the old standard? Does it match my DevOps infrastructure? Those sorts of things. All right, the last section here. How do I get unstuck? Because you are going to get stuck at some point if you have a real application. And oftentimes the errors look a little bit like this, where it's like, oh, peer dependencies from code that I didn't write and I don't know how to fix. Right? Has anybody seen this error before? Okay, everyone. Step 1, don't panic. It's going to be okay. We have Git history, and you are not the only person that's run into this, clearly, and you're not the only person that's going to get past this. So I believe in you. So here's some principles. Focus on updating as little as possible. Right? The smaller your update is, the smaller the chance you're going to ruin your entire project. Experiment. Dash dash force and dash dash allow dirty feel dirty, and they're called dirty, but they're actually tools that you should have in your toolbox. And the last one sounds a little bit weird, but ignore version mismatches as long as you can. Especially in the earlier versions of Angular, you would often have dependencies say oh, I don't know what, this version of Angular, I've never seen it before, I don't trust it. It's usually okay. I want to go through 4 different gotchas around dependencies, the new NPM in version 16, some cruft from NPM and Yarn, and strictness. So dependencies. Relying on dead code is never going to get less painful. I had an example where I had a material design time picker component that I was using, and it didn't support Ivy. So when they dropped view engine compatibility, ngCC, I now could not use that code anymore, had to go do something. Fortunately, I kind of looked out in the community, and there was a brand new project from a different developer, rewritten from the ground up, matching the API of my old dependency. So kudos to the ecosystem. Everyone in here that's writing code and sharing on GitHub, thank you. You are part of the solution that makes all of us better. Yeah, thank you. And so as you're updating your dependencies, as you run into these issues, share your problems, because other people are going to have similar experiences. They're either going to want to help you solve your problem or point you in the right direction. Do not build software in a silo alone at your computer. Go on to the internet, share, talk to people. And also, make sure you're solving the right problem, because oftentimes we get so focused on this API that we used to have when it maybe dropping that component entirely would just be simpler. So we talked about this new NPM error. This looks really scary. Basically, what NPM did in version 16 is they changed the behavior of peer dependencies. The good news is there's a really secret thing that says -- legacy peer deps. This is not an Angular update failure. Your Angular project did update, and you can just run npmi legacy peer deps, or use Yarn, which is becoming kind of a legacy package manager, and it will just work. So Hooray, you're welcome. So yeah, npm-i legacy peer deps will solve any of those weird like v16 of node peer dep dependency problems. I've also run into a bunch of issues. I've actually filed issues on the Angular GitHub repository, and the teams basically said, just rm-rf your node modules. Shouldn't happen, but this is software and it's imperfect and it does work. And if you're feeling flavorful, remove your package log too. Get some new versions of everything. The last one that gotcha that I want to talk about is strictness, where Angular always tries to be as strict as possible because we write better software that way. But strictness can oftentimes, when you're updating, get in the way, and so just turn it off for a little bit. It's okay. You'll be fine. You can turn it back on later. Once you're updated, you're on the latest version. And the last option, just really quick, is the nuclear option, where if you need to remove the cruft or you want to skip some of the steps that we've talked about, create a new project, move your old source app folder into the new project, copy over your assets. I have done this many, many times. It works. Go for it. All right. To summarize, just one final bit here. Don't give up on your code, right? Don't leave all that code behind dead on the floor. Update it and bring it into the future and let it live a new life. We're going to have a lot of changes over the next year in Angular. Signal, standalone components, new template semantics at all. If this talk was helpful in any way, hopefully you all invite me back next year. Thank you so much.